something I talk a lot to my team about with all objections. I think a lot of SDRs get in the mindset of like, oh, people are telling me to just send an email because they're not interested. And then they're always assuming like, oh, it's just a brush off, it's just a brush off. And it gets to the point, and I've heard it before, where I've done call reviews with the team, and they've said, just send me an email, and they're like, okay, I'll send somebody over, and then hang up the phone straight away. And just in their tone drops, and they get very defeatist about the situation. So with any objections, make sure that you're like staying positive, and being like, yeah, absolutely, of course I can send you over an email. Like, make sure it's that kind of tonality, as well. Don't always assume it's a brush up. Cool. Should we jump into the next one?
Let's go to the next one. We ain't got the funds.
Super relevant, right? With everything going on.
Very.
I'm sure a lot of people are kind of like budget freezes and everything else. So budget. How are you handling that one?
This is especially if you're doing a cold call, this is very difficult. Well, we put it this way. It's harder because you don't have a lot of context, like you haven't done the discovery. So it's hard to really push back on this one. Because obviously if you're in a sales cycle, you have information so you can push back. Harder when you don't, right? So what I would tell you, when I tell you all in this scenario, what you're looking to do is, we have no budget. I don't have the time for the money right now. There's two different things you want to identify. One is, what have they bought already? Right? So that's number one. What have they already bought? And then two is, where else can you get the money? So for an example, if someone says, hey, we have no budget, I don't have money right now, I'm saying, hey, thanks for being transparent with me. Appreciate the context. I'm curious, like, what solutions like ours have you bought in the past 6 to 12 months? Because I want to get an understanding, have they bought anything like us? Because if they have, then that means that they have spent money on something like ours. Now I need to figure out, how do they actually, is that product even like, is that good for them? Do they actually like enjoy that? Right? Like, what is actually happening there? So there's that, right? So I like that piece. And then the second piece that I look at is saying, hey, know that you don't have budget right now. I'm curious, does that mean you don't have budget only in your department, or is that the organization? So what I'm trying to fish for here is, sometimes people will be like, you know what, we don't have budget in our department, but as an organization, we do have budget in other places. So now it's your job to uncover and find clues to see, can we go find another department to then get those, whatever you're looking for in that scenario, right? That's the way that I think about this. Curious what you think, David, and people that are in the comments, how you handle this objection. But I found that like, people have money, there's just another department, you have to go figure it out, or they've already bought something, which is why they don't have the budget, and you have to figure out like, okay, is that even going well? Like, are they looking to buy other things to complement that, etc.?
Yeah, awesome. No, I totally agree. I think for me, so when we're looking at this from a sales development lens, right? And or kind of it's the first cold call. It's going to be very, as you mentioned, in the sales cycle, we might have prospects that can create the budget later, but they're not gonna. It's gonna be very difficult to do that within just that one cold call. So for me, I think I see we have no budget as just a timing objection. It's the same as, hey, I've got like a lot on right now, or like, we're going through a review of like this, and so, or we're going through like an acquisition, or and then, yeah, it's more of a timing issue. And so the key here is to kind of, or the best way of handling this is by understanding a pain, challenge, or goal that the prospect has right now. And then when you get there, we have no budget, reminding the prospect, well, you said that you were struggling, you were struggling with your hiring process. Would it be fair if we had a short call to show you how we can help fix that problem now, and then when you have the budget, at least then it will be, you've been through that review process and you can consider it when the time is right. So for me, it's about kind of, firstly, the process, which you should be doing on every call anyway, of understanding the prospect's pain, and then using that pain when you get this objection to try and create some urgency in at least reviewing your product or service now, because that, once they get into that conversation, once they start seeing and viewing, like whether it be like a SaaS platform or seeing the product that you have, then their views on budget might change quite quickly, right? Or they might go to their manager and said, hey, this is a big priority, like can I get budget for it? So that's personally the way that I'm going about it. We have a classic SDR AE setup, so especially for us, it's our SDRs are super focused on just creating the conversations and getting us into that conversation. So I'm kind of just removing that point and saying, look, like it's totally free to have that, at least start that conversation now, and that's how I'm handling it.
Yeah, I like that.
Cool. We've got some comments. I'm seeing. We're just trying to dive into pain a bit more, knowing that if the pain gets too painful, budget exactly so. I think I always say my team are mostly focused on companies that are above 1,000 employees, and so for us, especially, like I know that these companies with over 1,000 employees, they're not suddenly going broke. Right, the reality is that they just don't have the budget now, but there is so much potential for like budget creation if the pain is real enough, and also the solution that you're offering seriously addresses that problem. It could just be a budget reallocation process. But thanks for your comment. Have you ever? I'm sure, Morgan, you've had experiences of people saying that they've got no budget and then
it magically appears.
Yeah,
100%. And the pain conversation that we're having is not wrong. It's just at the same time, this is a cold call, so you might not get there because they're going to be defensive anyways. If this was a discovery call, then it's a little bit different. So on the cold call, you really have to find a way very quickly to identify, like, and you're not looking for like a overwhelming like headache, migraine pain. You're looking for like a small, like little pain, a little bit, so that you can get on our call, so you can really diagnose like what's going on, right? Because it's just gonna be a lot harder for you to like really do a real discovery on a cold call, because most people are not gonna let you do that, and they're gonna be like, I'm trying to get out of here. So that's why I try to find at least like one thing that I could attach to and then quickly move it into a call. So wanted to add that too.
It's interesting that you said that, because when we first or often when we were training and the team brand new and they're new to sales, we talk about pain, and literally I think the thing that goes through their mind is the fact that it's like someone needs to be like dying on the floor, and the whole business is collapsing. And so I'm glad you said that, because we stopped talking about pains and we started talking about pains, challenges, and goals. Challenge, like everybody has multiple challenges that they're facing, but also businesses are very willing to pay a lot of money just to fix something that is a challenge, right? That is the nature of business, and goals are super important as well. Like perhaps, and especially relevant now in October, I'm sure a lot of management teams are doing their planning for 2023, and they'll have a bunch of goals that are associated with it, and there's probably a process that they need to go through. There's probably stuff that they need to implement now or perhaps January to meet those goals. So pains, challenges, and goals, the PCGs we call them. Great. Should we jump into the next one?
Let's go.
And I think we had some timing issues on this webinar. So thanks for everybody that's kind of joined, perhaps a little bit later. Just a reminder, we've got some objections that we wanted to go through today, but if anybody has any objections that they've struggled with, maybe something came up this week for the first time, they've never heard it before, feel free, post it in the chat, and we'll definitely get to it. Okay, I'm not the decision maker. Let me talk to my boss. I'm not in charge of this. This is not what I want. Like this doesn't involve me. That kind of objection. What we're doing now, Morgan?
Yeah. So this is where, I mean, there's a lot of scenarios, right? Because a lot of people have different personas they reach out to, and like they may not be the decision maker, or they need to talk to their boss. Whatever it is, it's fine. What we want to be able to do is paint a scenario of why they are rejecting you in this case, and how you can turn the tables. So when someone's like, hey, like I'm not a decision maker, I didn't talk to my boss, this is not what I want to do, you want to ask a question like, hey, like, typically when people, they pitch you or call you about solutions like this, what is the normal process? Do you take this and go to your boss? Are you included in the like, how does this go? Right? You want to get an assessment of like how it typically goes. And so they may be like, hey, yeah, like normally how this process works is if like you send me an email, I forward it to my boss and they're interested, we can talk. And we can say, okay, well, in the process of like typically how we work with buyers is we like to get an understanding of like how we can help you and partner with you so we can take this right to your decision maker to make some type of difference or impact here. So then I like to flip the question back on them and say, hey, based on what I've talked to you about so far, is anything like a highlight? Is this relevant in any way? And then they might be like, you know what, like actually, yeah, like this is relevant, but I know I have to talk to my boss, and every time I've done that so far, it hasn't worked out. So that's where in this scenario, if someone's like, I'm not the decision maker, I need to go talk to my boss, you want to show them that they are valuable and say, hey, like I actually want to talk to you to see what's going on in your world so that we could take that and then go talk to your boss or decision maker. So you may not get to the decision maker immediately, but these people typically are defensive, or they've had, they've gone to their boss before and it hasn't worked out. So now I'm switching the narrative so that I can have a better conversation with them. So that's the way that I go about this.
I think I'm stealing this from a friend of mine at Aurum. I've forgotten. I say friend, someone that I met at Aurum. I've completely forgot his name. I'd love to give him a shout out, but he was presenting his tool and gave someone a call live, which was super impressive. And generally, this objection comes up at the end of a call when you're basically saying, "Hey, would you like a meeting?" Like, is there or the next steps, I'd love to book in 15 minutes of time. And then people are like, I'm not the decision maker. And I'm a really big believer in the best way of objection handling is actually to try and eliminate the objection from ever coming up. And this is a really good way of eliminating that. Every time he closes, he goes, look, I know that you're not going to be the only person in the process here for evaluation, but I see you as someone, super important to this process. And then says, so I'd love to kind of book 15 minutes with you. And I think by doing that, firstly, it's an ego fill, right? It's getting your prospect on side by saying, like, making them feel super important. But then it's very difficult after, it's very difficult after he said that to then turn around and go, look, I'm not the decision maker. Because you've already addressed it. You've already said, look, I know you're not the decision maker. You're not going to be the final decision maker. So that's another really good, like for me, another really good way is just every time you're closing, saying, look, I know you're not going to be the only person in the process. Because at the end of the day, unless you're calling 10-person companies and you're calling the CEO, there's always going to be multiple stakeholders that will be involved eventually.
Yep. 100% every single time. Every single time.
Amazing. We've got one from Taylor in the chat. I'm hoping that I'm hoping that's an objection that you get, Taylor, and not how you feel about this. Taylor is getting that I'm not interested objection. So this is a classic. Like, Morgan, how are you dealing with that?
I think it's the same thing, David, like we just talked about. Like it depends on when they say it, right? Like if they say at the very beginning versus the end versus the middle, right? There's a lot of reasons on why, someone would say, I'm not interested. I think there's a question that I was coaching a couple people on. We started testing it, and the very beginning. Okay, well, I could speak to that. There's a question that we started asking that got people to open up a little bit, or people might be rude on this question, by the way. So I'm not saying this is a silver bullet. So we just started asking people, like, hey, they're not interested. Be like, okay, like, I'm curious, like, for my professional development, what makes you say that, and what could have made this call better? So we like flip it back on the person to like get a perspective and understand like what are they talking about. So you typically will get like not interested at the beginning or after a value prop. So we just say, hey, like out of curiosity, like what makes you say that? Just looking to enhance my professional development and see where I went wrong. So you put it back on yourself, as in like I made a mistake because you're not interested. And we found that a lot of people would be like, oh, well, I just don't like cold calls. So like I didn't hear what you said. So, like, some people like don't even listen, right? People say not interested, like sometimes they don't even listen to what you said. Or some people like, you know what, like I didn't like this part, or like this is something that's not a big thing for me right now. So then that led into discovery, pain points, so we can move from there. So I would actually just say that question alone and that narrative, how to approach it, helped open up the conversation. But I'm curious what you're coaching your team on, David.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, exactly the same thing. Firstly, don't hang up the phone, or don't
Yeah,
think it's
don't do
all over
that.
there. People say I'm not interested, usually at the beginning, which I think is what you're getting a lot of, Taylor. And it's an emotional reaction to you being a salesperson and people naturally not wanting to be sold to, and just generally the negative stigmas of getting a cold call. However, most people, once you essentially need to turn that emotional moment into a rational moment, and because the rational side of things is what you can actually use, then you can actually deliver an objection handle. The way you do that is you ask why, right? You ask why they're not interested. Um, just a reminder here to everybody, I always bucket everybody into, and this is a big overgeneralization, but I bucket all my prospects into three different sections. We've got yes people, we've got maybe people, we've got no people. Yes people we love yes people, right? They're the sort of people that are always going to say yes to everything. That's just in their nature. Okay, and that's why, like, if you make enough calls, you will get someone to turn up for a meeting because there are yes people in the world. On the other side of things, and this is where, this is specifically related to the not interested in objections, there are no people. And no people are the opposite of yes people, that they want the world to burn and they say no to everything.
Yep.
I had my introduction to sales was door-to-door sales. I sold basically a food delivery service, these food boxes, and I'd like to think I was pretty good at it. And part of the perks of the role was I actually got that food box delivered every day to my house, or not every day, every week. And one of the weeks I wasn't going to use that food, so I went round to my neighbour's apartments, and knocked on the door. And considering this is my day job, I'd been doing it for 2 years. I was successfully like going up to random strangers and getting them to pay for this food box. I knocked on this stranger's door with an actual food box, and said, "Hey, look, I've got a bunch of like fresh veg and meats and everything else. I'm going away, so there's no way that I'm going to use it. I just, do you want it? Like, you can have it, like, totally for free, no strings attached, free food, free really good food." And this neighbor was like, no, and didn't give me any reason at all. So just remember that there are those people, and sometimes when, if you're getting not interested, you are going to find that some people are just not interested. Don't take it personally. It's a them problem, not a you problem. But the people that say I'm not interested, that are in that maybe section, you can turn around. I agree with what Morgan said. The other way that I tend to handle it is by saying, look, just for my own notes, is there, like, do you mind me asking why? Because so often people then take a step back and go, well, actually, what is it that you do? Because they can't give you an answer because they've said, I'm not interested straight away. So try and, yeah. So I think the majority of people that say, I'm not interested straight away, you're not going to be able to turn around. I'm just going to say that now, because they're those no people, and at least they haven't wasted your time. But if you go through the process of every single time saying, is there any like reasons, do you mind me asking why, or responding exactly how Morgan said, if you can turn maybe 30% of those people objecting that way into an actual conversation about the product, I think you're winning.
Yep.
Is what I'd say. Awesome. Well, while we're on the topic, if you've pitched the whole product and then they say they're not interested, Morgan, because you mentioned that at the start, it does depend on the time. I know we focused on it being at the start. What would you do if it was at the end?
Yeah, you pitched a project and they said I'm not interested. I think I think that's where you could flip the question and you could be like, hey, like, since you mentioned that you're not interested, sounds like you already have this covered. What exactly are you doing to address this problem? Or what are you doing to address this goal that I mentioned? So what I'm doing is I'm flipping back on them. If you're not interested, that means that you're good, you have it covered, you've already solved this problem or a goal that I've identified. So what are you currently doing right now to address it? So then now I'm flipping back on you. You're either going to be like, well, we haven't done anything. Then it's like, okay, so help me understand what exactly you're not interested in, right? So now I'm putting a little bit more pressure on them in that scenario. So that's a way that you can go about that as well.
Yeah, same thing. Taylor, thank you so much for commenting that one. I'm sure everybody's struggling there. Cool. I think we've got one more that we wanted to go through. So let me flick over now. Okay, it's the timing objection. I don't need it right now. How we handling that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back to something I just said recently. So you'll notice a lot of these objections, I like to ask questions, and I coach people to ask questions on like what's really going on. The objection at its like surface level is like it's a high level objection. It's just like, oh, like I don't need this right now. I don't feel like doing this right now. And it's like, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? Without, you don't want to ask that question to be rude. So in this scenario, I'd be like, okay, well, you don't need the solution right now. Transparently, what are you doing to accomplish that objective at this current moment? Like, you could even press a little bit and say like, hey, like, are you 100% confident that based on what we just talked about, that you can address these gaps that we just are, found, articulated, whatever, in the next 6 months? These are questions you have to ask people and be like, do you think you could do this essentially like without this solution? And then they have to like identify like, can they do that or not? And that's where I'm coming from on this question. Hey, you don't need it right now? Okay, cool. So what are you going to be doing to accomplish this? How confident are you in accomplishing this? These are questions I start asking, and then people are like, oh, well, I don't think that we can. It's like, okay, yeah, like that's the scenario, because then they're going to realize that they cannot do that, or they can, and that's fine. But you have to ask those questions for them to really understand that.
Amazing. I want to talk about feel felt found. Have you ever heard of feel felt found?
I have. It's the infamous feel felt found. Absolutely. I think it's another good way. It's another good way of handling this as well.
Where did it come from? Is there like was there the first person that did feel felt found? I feel like I need to meet that guy.
Yeah, I don't know who. It's definitely someone like, there's an originator, but I actually don't know who it is. But there is an originator.
Okay. All right. So
there is one. Yeah.
The quick version of feel felt found, for anybody that hasn't heard of it, I'm sure like a bunch of you already know all about this, but I was always taught in terms of objection handling to have the structure feel felt found. And basically the idea is the first thing that you want to say is that you understand how they feel, how the prospect feels. And that's really showing like empathy and sympathy, and also recognizing the fact that they have that problem. So I don't need this solution right now. I totally understand how you feel. The next thing you want to do is then found. So is say what other people found once they had the conversation with you. And the reason you want to do that is you're basically saying to the prospect that the issue isn't isolated. The objection that you're saying is not isolated to you. Because it's, if someone feels like the problem they have is just a them problem, then it's very difficult for you to, it's much harder for you to kind of overcome that objection. So I don't need this solution right now. I understand how you feel. I speak to a bunch of sales, and I'm going to make this Cognism related. I speak to a bunch of sales managers over the past few weeks, and they've all been pretty busy at work. Q4, everything that's going on, and so they found, or they told me very, very similar things. And then the final thing is, sorry, that was felt. I've explained it completely wrong. So feel felt. I'm jet lagged. All right, let me off. So they felt very similarly. Feel felt found. And then the found bit, sorry, the last bit of an objection handle needs to be the solution. So I spoke to a bunch of sales managers. They felt exactly the same way with everything that's going on. Start of Q4, they want to. They've got a bunch of projects that to be ready for 2023. But what they found was that actually, what they found by coming into a conversation and just having that 15-minute catch up with us kind of next week is that it helped them plan out 2023 better. They were looking, a lot of them are in exactly the same boat as you. They're struggling to their sales teams are struggling to have conversations with their decision makers, and they don't want that to be a problem in 2023. So So I would suggest let's have the 15-minute catch up now, and then we'll be ready for 2023. So that's feel, felt, found, and that is the structure. You know, any objection handle you can structure in that way. The final thing that I will add that I don't think it was in the original feel, felt, found was move on. So the final thing that you want to do is you always want to ask a question that moves the conversation away from the objection that they've just given. And that's really going to show a sign of confidence that, you know, you've dealt with it. So as I said, you know, as I just mentioned there, it might be to then ask them for the 15-minute catch up next week. It could be another product related question, kind of discovery related question, but you need to move on. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. I think it's what we live and die by. At Cognism is structuring feel, felt, our objection handles in that way.
Yeah, feel, felt, found is a great way of going about it, and there's also scenarios where people know about the feel, felt, found, even prospects, right? So if you want to switch that around, you could use different words like we discovered, we uncovered, right? Those are other ways that you can go about it too. But David is spot on. That feel, felt, found works wonders in these types of conversations.
Amazing. All right, I think those were all the 5 that we were hoping to cover today. I don't know whether there's any objections that anybody wants us to go through really quickly. We are running short on time today, and I know it's the end of the month, so I'm sure that people want to kind of put some of these techniques immediately in action, maybe to make sure that they get to their target. But thank you so much for everybody joining in today. Sorry about I think we had some timing issues at the start, as I say, and this headset is not did me any favors either today. But Morgan, it's been a pleasure. When's the next one? I believe is on I think we're trying to organize it for like around the 9th of November. So as always, Ashley, the amazing Ashley, who puts all of these together for us, she will post in the chat now with the link. You can sign up. I think you get like alerts every time they, you know, we have one of these running. They kind of happen every 2 weeks. So I'll let Ashley post that into the chat now so people can join up. And as always, make sure you come and bring your questions. Feel free to follow. I'm sure you're all following Morgan already. If you're not, I don't know what you're doing. But feel free to follow Morgan on LinkedIn and myself. We're both always putting up a bunch of content. Yeah, Morgan, any final words?
No final words. Like David said, we'll be coming back in November and diving into all these different concepts again. If you came in late due to time, hopefully you got to catch some of the nuggets that were dropped here. No, it's again last day of the month. In the month, people want to take action. So if no one has any other objections that are currently on their mind, that's all we had for today. Just wanted to share some strategy with you all on how to handle these objections and how to be confident with it moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
All right, bye. Cheers.
Bye.